Well, Mr. Rose, are you ready to roll?
Let's do this.
Okay. All right, guys. I see folks still filing in, but we're just going to go ahead and get things started. Hello, everyone. Thank you for spending some time with us today to dig into a very interesting topic. My name is Brody Dorland. I am the new VP of Marketing at Lytho. Some of you on this webinar today might know me as one of the co-founders of Divvy HQ. Hopefully by now, all of you know that Divvy joined forces with Lytho earlier this year, and we've been having all kinds of fun, kind of merging our worlds together. Before I introduce our man of the hour, let me get a few housekeeping things out of the way. We are recording this webinar. So you'll get a recording link in a follow-up email in the next few days. We're also planning some Q&A time at the end. So per usual, please use that questions panel. And as those come in, we'll kind of save those for the end and then pepper Robert with all kinds of good stuff. And then lastly, you'll see up on the screen right now, we do have a special offer for webinar attendees. This is something we did with Robert and his good friend Joe Polizzi for the This Old Marketing podcast, but we would love to extend the offer to folks on the webinar today. So basic idea is that you can get 20% off of any Divvy or Lytho product for life. So that basically means we won't ever raise your prices. So that's kind of a nice thing. And if you act fast, you do have an opportunity to do a free 1-hour content workshop with Robert. Robert's been very gracious to provide his time and kind of dig into the weeds with any client who wants to kind of get things kicked off with any Divvy or Lytho product. So all you have to do is go to lithoforlife.com and to get more details on that special offer. Okay, with all of that out of the way, let's get this show on the road. For those of you who don't know Mr. Robert Rose, for the past 15 years, he's been helping business leaders balance the art and science of marketing and tell their story more effectively. Over the last 12 years, Robert's been serving as a fractional marketing leader for startups, including Divvy HQ, media companies, and the Content Marketing Institute. He's advised more than 500 companies, including 15 of the Fortune 100. He's also a best-selling author of 4 books on modern marketing and content strategy. I could go on, but let's just say Robert knows a thing or two about what we're going to cover today, both on the content side and the AI side. So without further ado, take it away, Robert.
Well, you're very kind. It's almost as someone wrote that for you. It sounds, I don't know. Thank you all so very much for attending this. Hopefully we'll have a little bit of fun. And yeah, it's been about 22 seconds since we've talked about AI. So yeah, so let's talk a little bit more about AI. So what we want to talk about today is really how does a company because one of the things that we've noticed is that generative AI, and that's clearly what we're talking about here when I say we're talking about AI, is generative AI, where, there's AI almost embedded in all of the tools that we're using these days. But what we're talking about is content specifically, and really specifically around the idea of creation of content. And so let's talk about how do we actually start to make sense of this, because it's one of the sexiest things right now that really no one's doing at scale. Companies are still trying to experiment with this. They're still trying to figure out in these use cases and where everything fits in and all those kinds of things. And there's a reason that it feels so troublesome right now, that it feels so overwhelming, that it feels like, where should we even begin? And it's because Gen AI is unique. It is there are unique aspects to it. The first is that when we think about content creation, generative AI is unpredictable. And what I mean by that is that by design, it is unlike other software tools in the sense that it's meant to give you answers to what it is you ask. And those answers are not going to be the same. They will always give you multiple answers to the same questions. There's a fun experiment you can do when I said, hey, create me a great abstract for this webinar, right? And Gen AI would create me an abstract for this webinar. And then I would say, hey, that's not very good. I want a better one. Is this the best you can do? And Gen AI will say, oh, no, of course I can do better. I can do better. And it'll write a different one for you. And I'll say, well, is that the best you can do? And it'll say, no, I can write you and you can do that on and on and on. And it will never go, shut up. this is the third one was the best one. You should use that one. It will always tell you that you're right. And that's one of the keys is it's never going to give you the same answer twice. The second is that it's fallible. And we all know this now, starting to really start to come out in the way that Google's, for example, using AI and generative search. We give it false information. It generates its own misinformation because of, with the classic hallucination. And so we also know that it makes mistakes. So that there's something really interesting in that when we start thinking about content, which is Gen AI, unlike other tools, requires trust and judgment. In other words, we have to have trust in what it is that it's actually putting back to us because it's going to be different every time. And because it's never going to tell us that this one is the best, we have to be able to trust it, that it's going to give us the best that it can actually do. And that's unlike any other really technology that we've even thought of over the last 20 years, right? If you think about, think about an Excel spreadsheet for a moment, right? If you get to the end of an Excel spreadsheet and the numbers don't add up and there's something weird about what it looks like and you're like, wait, what? In your head, it was you. You messed up somewhere. It wasn't that they messed up somewhere, that the software messed up. You messed up somewhere. If there's a little squiggly underneath, the word in Microsoft Word, it's probably you, right? It's probably you that's using the wrong word there. So there's little trust needed in those kinds of things. Same with Photoshop, same with all the kinds of content that we're using. The other thing is it about judgment, right? Because it's giving you and it's not telling you, and giving, sort of wisdom in the way that it says this is the best. Well, there's a whole Dunning-Kruger effect. Now, for those of you who may not know, the Dunning-Kruger effect is basically in order to recognize something as good or as something as expert, you have to have the same knowledge as having expertise in the subject anyway. In other words, you can't recognize if something's good if you don't have some level of subject matter expertise in the thing. And so, for when we look at generative AI content, we as marketers, as communicators, have to have the same levels of skills in order to create the thing, in order to recognize that it's actually the best version of that thing. That means that there's no way that it ultimately replaces us because we have to have the judgment on it to understand that if it's actually good enough to communicate the thing that we want to communicate. So it doesn't help us be more creative. Gen AI at the end of the day doesn't help us be more creative. We are our own creators. It helps us being faster at expressing that creativity. So, but it's here, right? We've got AI. It's here. It's ready to roll. We're dealing with it as best we can. We did research on this, and 80% of what we looked at from a marketing perspective, they're looking at some level of AI. But what is getting good at AI? What does that even mean? Well, when we started to ask, we said, well, what's going on? Are you actually integrating this into your workflow, into your content collaboration, into your content calendar, into what you're doing in workflow? And they said, no. For the most part, we're looking at individual experimentation. Basically, everybody along the line sort of doing their own individual experimentation with the tools, whether it be ChatGPT or Gemini or Claude or whatever tools you're sort of experimenting with. Very few. Now, there's a few, obviously, they're saying, no, we're not allowed to do anything. Our IT department, our legal department has said hands off. So maybe we're playing with it on our phones and stuff. We're thinking about it. But for the most part, there are, yes, individual experiments going on. But here, the key is that if we're going to recognize value out of it, integration is critical. We have to get integration across our team. In other words, the business has to be good at generative AI if we're going to actually make this a tool worth implementing as part of our overall marketing and communication strategy. But remember the Dunning-Kruger effect, right? Where we have to be able to recognize what's good, what is actually effective, what's actually helping us be more expressive, or helping us scale, or helping us be more efficient, et cetera. So this tension between those two things is why it feels so pressured right now, why it feels so rushed, why we feel so basically inadequate in so many ways. And in my view, Gen AI is actually misnamed. It should actually be called expressional AI because it really doesn't help us generate things. It doesn't help us create things. It helps us express the ideas that we have. Sometimes those ideas are good and it can express it very well. And we can prompt AI in a very interesting way to actually come back with something that's useful. And sometimes it doesn't help us really at all at the moment. And we'll see how much better it gets over time. But that's what it's built to do. It's built to express ideas, to basically create and calculate words, right? As I've often said, AI doesn't give you the best answer. It always gives you the most probable answer. That's the reason that we want to think about it as really just a word calculator more than anything else. So let's take a step back, because when we start looking at the creation process, one of the things, and we've been doing content strategy for companies for the last 15 years, and we've noticed a pattern here that we can actually start to see really coming to fruition as Gen AI becomes this sort of thing that we want to put into our process. It is that create, we often associate create as a workflow state. In other words, we say something like this, right? Where it's create, produce, manage, activate. That's as granular as we get with workflow. But of course, when we start looking at produce, manage, and activate, you can actually look at those. Like, we produce content, we manage content, we activate content, but those are really processes in and of themselves. So when we think about it, we often think about it like this. And when we look at clients, this is often the workflow that they've set up, right? So create just sort of exists out there in space, right? So the company will go, well, what's your process for creating content? And they'll go, well, I don't know. Just magic stuff happens, right? We ask for PowerPoints, we ask for ebooks, we ask for white papers, we ask for blog posts, we ask for web pages, we ask for emails, and then the content team just sort of does stuff and stuff happens and it comes out the other side. And when it comes out the other side, then we put it into our CMS technology or we put it into our management technology and it gets produced, and then it goes through, a manage and iterate process, and then it goes through activate and publish and out to the other end. But what, of course, happens either kind of organically or just sort of happens behind the scenes, behind the curtain, is create is its own process. So there's ideation, right? How does stuff get ideated, even created, like even originated? Where do the ideas come from? What are good ideas? What are bad ideas? Then there is prioritizing those ideas, because of course, if we want to prioritize those ideas, well, we really need to think about how we're going to, which ones we're going to do first, which ones are exactly the same as the others. Then, of course, there's researching and formulating and then writing the content and then actually putting it into some content management technology where we can intake it, move it through its structured paces, move it through its management, getting it through, whether it's regulatory or legal or all those kinds of things, and then finally out to the whatever channel it's going to live on. But that's key, right? Because when we think about where it is we want to insert AI, it's a mishmash, right? We don't have it all documented. We don't have it all set, that creation process. And remember, Gen AI is the key here, right? When we're thinking about where do we want to use Gen AI, our word calculator, well, we need to actually figure out where it's going to sit in there. And so that's why we end up with these just use cases everywhere. And they're mostly individual use cases because we haven't really gotten our workflow down. So thinking about getting ready for this, how do you get ready for AI? We suggest a 3-step process that you can go through, which is 1, map what we call the occurrent processes. Now, occurrent is just a fancy way to say what really gets done. And you know what I'm talking about, right? When that new employee comes in and they say, how does stuff get done? And you hand them the employee manual of stuff and you go, here's what the employee manual says, but don't pay any attention to that. Call Jane. Jane, she's the one who's going to make sure that you know what gets done, right? That's how it really gets done here. That's an occurrent process. It's how stuff really happens. And every business we've ever met has these things, these sort of wraparounds, sort of workarounds, sort of this way stuff really gets done. So you want to map those. Then second, we want to design what should happen, the way it should actually work. What in the creation process, how should it actually work? And then ultimately, we can start to develop what we can do from a profitability, from an effectiveness, from an efficiency standpoint when it comes to any technology. But in this particular case, we can talk it through with AI. So let's actually understand this, right? We're going to understand the problem before we actually try and solve it with generative AI. And then, spoiler alert, you may find that there are quite a few here that actually need to add resources, that need to actually provide net new abilities and skills that you didn't have before. So let's look at this really quickly one by one, because then I want to have Brody come in here and show you what it actually looks like in real life. So we're going to use a real life example here. This is a technology company that we worked with, mid-sized technology company, and they were basically looking at how to use Gen AI as part of their content marketing, their thought leadership process. Like, how do they develop thought leadership assets like ebooks and white papers and long, articles for blogs and those sorts of things. So what did we do? We first started with mapping the current, like, how does it work? How does it really work in the particular business? Our recommended project there was to conduct an audit on look at the actual current processes, like what's going on. How do white papers get done? How do blog posts get done? How do all these pieces actually work? What did we come up with? Well, we mapped out basically this process. The content team there was basically operating on a 70-30 sort of split. In other words, 70% of this stuff that they were creating was all based on sort of demand, right? Demand gen team, the CEO, the other people, sales people would come in and go, we need a blog post, we need an ebook, we need white papers, we need thought leadership, we need all this stuff. Go, go, go. And they would dutifully jump around and put it into their calendar, and they would, in their Excel spreadsheet, and they were trying to work through things and they were trying to figure it out. And 30% of their time, which was really spent mostly just crying over their keyboard, but mostly 30% was the proactive stuff, the stuff that they could actually create, a campaign that they could create, or an idea that the content team had. They wanted to really flip that because the content they were creating was not that great. And the reason for that is because it moved right into the create state. Remember the workflow state of create, where they said, oh, great, we're just going to throw it in, and then the designers are going to take over, and they're going to put it into PDFs, and they're going to put it into the ebook format, and they're going to put it into our blog post format, and away we go. And boom, it goes out to activation and publication. That's the way it really worked there. And they said, there's got to be a better way. There's got to be a better way to do this. So what do? We went to step 2. We said, how should it actually work? And so the team got together and they did a gap analysis, and they said, great, what's the new process that we actually want to look at here? Then they said, let's look at the use cases and let's start to articulate them against a category. And I'm going to finish with that because it's a little bit of an aha moment for you. But the idea is start to categorize these new use cases into a couple of different categories. New capabilities with net new resources. Remember the surprise spoiler alert that I talked about. Then there's new capabilities with existing resources, or what we all kind of expect, sort of more efficient processes, like doing stuff faster, better, and more mechanical. And so our targeted output there is what we're looking at is how do we get to faster, better, a better process. So what did they do? Well, they started to say, hey, listen, let's insert this new creation process where we do things like plan, prioritize, get an editorial board together, get a leadership council together, whatever your word for it is, but get a group together that helps to create an ideation and prioritization process where we go, yeah, these are good ideas. Let's mix this one. Let's fix this one. Let's slow down the creation process so that we can actually insert this prioritization. And that ultimately changed the calculus of what they were doing. So whether they got to 50% proactive stuff versus 40% reactive, and gave themselves a little bit of headroom, 10%, to say, yeah, we can try weird stuff off the wall, out of the box kind of innovation. That insertion of that simple planning and prioritization process as part of the creation workflow. Then they did 2 things. They separated out the creation and the production cycle, because they understood that part of the creation process was literally creating the raw content, creating and having that go through iterations. Because when they prioritize and plan, they go, hey, that white paper, parts of it would be great if we did, 3 blog posts with that white paper and 14 social posts and a press release, and all that content can get written prior, so that we're not reinventing the wheel when it ultimately goes to the produce stage. And then it can go into the digital asset management system. It can go into the CMS system. It can go into somebody's email box for activation, etc. So they're basically slowing down the front end of the process so that they can exponentially increase the back end of the process. Now, that's the whole other webinar when we can talk about the details of how all that gets done. But the most important thing was this new process gave them the ability to start segmenting use cases for the team, how the team can use AI in each of these places. For example, the planning and prioritization, use cases there, use cases for putting all these things together, whether they're a good idea or a bad idea, use cases from the create process where raw content can be derived, derivative content, well, write me the abstract for the webinar for this white paper, write me the abstract for the white paper that's going to go on the front page of the website so that it's all one portfolio of packaging to go to the production people when they start designing it. Creation happens across the entirety of the life cycle there. Then finally, and then I wanted to have Brody come in here and talk about what it looks like in real life here, is that they started to categorize those things, right? Once I started to categorize those things, I started to say, look, is it a net new capability that is more efficient for us? Or is it basically a more efficient thing that we're already doing? In other words, is it just more efficient to do the thing that we're going to do? The first one, that new capability that's more efficient, we would call an enhancement to our existing process. And then if it's more efficient and we're already doing it, it's just faster way of doing things, we call that refinement. And then if there is a less efficient but thing that we're doing, in other words, stuff that we don't prioritize, but it's really cool, but we just don't do it because it's just too tough or it takes too long or we just don't have the time or resources, well, that would be a supplement. In other words, it would supplement our existing process. And then finally, if there's anything that's a super cool new capability that quite honestly is going to make us less efficient, but it's just super cool and super valuable, that would be a complement to what we're doing. Categorizing the use cases there, and I'll tell you why that's such an important piece of what we do toward the backside of this webinar. But basically now what we can do with all of those categorizations, the use cases, and the new process is that we are now ready to be ready for AI. We can validate the need of each of those use cases and prioritize them and say, great, let's validate with our other teams, with sales, with demand gen, with our CEO, and let's validate those needs into a document. That document becomes our requirements document for the new tool, whatever AI tool we want to look at needs. We then take those validated needs and we go, which ones are the most important? Like either idiosyncratic to us, we have a special need for it, or is super, super important. We call those focal needs. So if you take those validated needs and then prioritize those, we get to a technology shortlist. Like basically, there will only be a few technology providers who can actually meet those ideas. Not our complete wish list, but just our focal needs, because that gets to our short list of providers. Now we can also go look with the focal needs, with our short list at helpers, right? Whether it's an agency, a consultancy, a freelancer, a tech firm who's going to help us implement and do all of this work with whatever short list of vendors we can have work with us. And that gets us enough information to put together our information in our RFP. So we're going to put together an RFP for the technology, for the implementation partner who's going to help us with this thing, and then ultimately work with them to get to a proof of concept for those specific use cases and help us expand from there. That becomes a strategy we can actually do, we can actually realize, we can actually get to. So I want to now turn it over to Brody, because of what he's going to do is sort of show you what does this look like when we actually put, literally digital words into software and what this all can actually look like. So Brody, I'm going to turn it over to you for now and let you share your screen and take it from here, and then we'll come back and talk a little more.
So, as Robert mentioned, when we looked at that, one of those previous slides that really kind of Robert called out all of those different phases of even the creation process, things like ideation and, pre-writing research. That's really a lot of where Divvy lives. So I thought we'd pull out a few of the different things that not only Divvy has natively, but also how you can leverage your Divvy environment, your Divvy data to be able to perhaps integrate some of these AI tools into your overall workflow. So let me, can I move forward here? Here we go. So I wanted to kind of start with the an ideation use case. Now in Divvy, for those of you who are Divvy users, I think you'll probably be able to say that the parking lot in Divvy is a really nice tool for you guys. But really, at the end of the day, it's just a repository for ideas. And it's shared, centralized, so anybody on in the Divvy environment can throw ideas into there. But the main idea is that when you've got ideas in there, it's really easy to potentially export those ideas out, or even prior to exporting them out, having a centralized repository where an editorial board or a content planning team is able to go in and review the ideas and determine what might make sense to go ahead and get on the schedule to kind of move forward with. But if there's a whole bunch of ideas in there and you need to kind of evaluate them in bulk, this is an opportunity where AI could come into play. It is really easy to export, your data out of the application, and using something like ChatGPT, being able to import or upload a file of ideas. Obviously, there's a process that you would go through there to prompt the model. Understanding here's our target audiences, here's our topic focus point, our focus list, if you will. So if you've got a list of topics that you're typically trying to cover, and then what are the goals that you guys are trying to achieve? So there is some prompting involved with that. But once you get that list imported and the model is prompt, then you can just say, hey, ChatGPT, score these, kind of giving creating a scoring algorithm to help you understand which ideas are the best. Kind of the outputs of that. Really, from a strategic alignment standpoint, the application can help you determine a score for that strategic alignment, figure out which ones are the best ideas, which ones we want to move forward with. And then also, maybe an interesting component, oftentimes we as content producers or content teams need to have some backing to say no. I know that's kind of hard to do sometimes, but if the data comes back and says no, this is not actually a good idea based on your strategy, based on your audiences, your topic list, those kinds of things, you now have some backing there to be able to say no. So that's maybe a nice thing to have in your back pocket there. Just using this as an example, Robert mentioned earlier that there is a technology company that they worked with. So let's kind of imagine, I'm going to kind of piggyback on that use case. Let's imagine we are a technology company and kind of look at this from a client standpoint, a Divvy client standpoint. So let's say that we have one of our ideas that we've kind of looked at and said, okay, maybe the AI told us that this would actually be a really good idea for us to move forward with. So the X phases of content marketing platform adoption. So we want to kind of move forward there, and that kind of leads into the next use case, which is a research and pre-writing phase. So let's imagine that with Divvy, we want to be able to see what we've done in the past on this topic. So one of the nice things about the Divvy as just an application in general is it becomes our content archive, content inventory, everything that we've ever done. And we can query the system very easily. As you can see in the screenshot here, we queried the system looking for anything we've done on the topic of adoption, or the keyword of adoption in this case. And we were able to find, seven past content items that might have been a host of different things. Looks like we have some case studies in there, probably have some blog content, maybe some other pieces that we've done in the past. What can we reference, reuse, or repurpose to help to springboard this whole operation? So it's nice to be able to have that inventory in place, that archive, to be able to quickly see things that we've done in the past, and maybe that really speeds up our process. And from an output standpoint, the more recycling we can do, the less waste we have, the better. Obviously, there's a lot of efficiencies that can come from that. Less time to first draft. And then also there's even some internal linking opportunities. So in this particular example, if several of the things that we've done in the past were web content, blog posts, those kinds of things, with the new piece that we're creating, we can definitely reference those and do internal linking to those posts as we're producing the new article. keep on cruising here. Formulating and drafting. Kind of extending that process on. Obviously, there's a ton of great tools. It is generative AI. So many of the tools kind of focus on the content generation side of things. But there's also, there's probably, as we go, we're going to find that, we start to recognize that some tools really are standouts. Obviously there's a lot of use and a lot of focus around ChatGPT, has been for quite some time, but there's also some other great tools out there that are really more well tuned to marketing departments, marketing teams. Things like Writer is a great one. Jasper is also another great one. Maybe some of these that your writing teams might have experimented with. There's still going to be some prompting in these various tools that you're going to use, and certainly we would encourage you, as you guys start using and experimenting with the tools, starting to develop prompt libraries. Whether those are things that you guys experiment with internally, you typically get really good results out of these things, and then you can start creating a prompt library that you then can share as a team. Writer actually has a really nice tool for a Teams prompt library that can be shared across teams. So that might be a great thing to use. So in this particular case, I basically prompted the model here. I'll kind of fast forward that I'm using the Writer integration that we have right within Divvy, and I built a prompt out and had it generate an outline of, okay, if we're going to do this blog post on the X phases of content marketing platform adoption, and here's the title, here's a basic summary. Go ahead and spit out what might be used as a good first draft for us, or maybe even just an outline to help our writers get started. All of that is great and can really speed up the efficiency of things, but as Robert mentioned earlier, you still need good writers, editors, subject matter experts, and obviously your creatives to delineate what is actually good. Because if you're eliminating those folks from your team, those folks that are actually good and can understand what's valuable, then you might be just putting crap out there. So obviously we don't want to do that. So that's just something that you absolutely want to keep in mind. I was at a conference about a few weeks ago, and they were talking about a particular company that laid off half of their writing staff. The CEO made the decision to lay off half of the writing staff because AI, and that's just such a it's not the right way to think about it. You still need these people in many ways. Last use case I'll talk about here is kind of digging into the workflow process. So obviously, within Divvy and even Lytho products, there's a lot of workflow functionality that we offer kind of across platforms. And as Robert mentioned earlier, you really want to understand what that workflow process looks like, and even what an ideal workflow process looks like. But then, even then, you don't stop. You're always, if you want to optimize that process, you want to be able to analyze that and have data that kind of backs up maybe deficiencies in your process. And that's also one of the things that we can provide with Divvy. Just using an example of Divvy Analytics. This is a common report that we include in our Divvy Analytics production dashboards, where we can take a look across the workflow and kind of understand and categorize the different workflow stages, from intake, production, reviewing, and publishing. And we can see this is actually a client example where they were really heavy on their review process. This tells me, just looking at this, that is there, with their reviews that they have built into their workflow, is this maybe a little too onerous? They've got too much baked in there. Can we optimize that review and approval process, maybe squeeze some of that down and make it more efficient? And maybe we can really make a dent in our overall volume, the output of that. Kind of looking at our average lead times. That's also another report that is come standard in our Divvy Analytics product. So being able to understand, in this particular example, we've got a blog post at 28 days. Man, I think we could probably shave quite a bit off that if we have an optimized process. So it's good to have the visibility. And again, understanding and using the tools at your disposal to be able to then understand what some of those use cases could be for AI. But really, at the end of the day, you need to have good tools in place that help you understand, and good data in place to help you understand kind of what's going on now, to help you identify some of these use cases for some of this AI technology. So reduce lead times, reduce cost. Really, if we can squeeze a good chunk of time out of these workflow processes, that is real money, because we can really increase the output of our overall content volume. So I'll shoot it back over to Robert here, but just a quick recap of some of those use cases from an ideation perspective. We can really help out there. I didn't mention this earlier, but request intake is also another one that is a functionality that both Divvy and Lytho provides. But there's probably use cases there where AI could help that process. Obviously, research and pre-writing, kind of searching your archive for past assets. Where can we reuse or reference content that we've done in the past? Formulating and drafting, there's a lot of great tools out there that'll help you do that faster. And then that workflow analysis piece, documented processes plus good tools, plus production data equals money. So with that, I'll hop back over here and stop sharing.
All right. If you stop sharing, I can, yeah, there you go. And then I'll just go ahead and share my screen again here. So I hope you can now see how it sort of starts to string together from the sort of ideation, the research, the actual creation process, and starts to actually become a real thing for the team to get value out of. Because that's really where we're seeing with the clients that we're working with a lot, we're seeing a lot of that value where it is being generated because the team is now getting usefulness out of the tool, not just the individual getting usefulness out of the tool. And so where do we see the most opportunities? As we've started to collect the research on the use cases from various clients, when we look at the sort of life cycle of the create state, we can start to see that really at that pre-writing, there's quite a few, the size, by the way, of the little chevrons there sort of indicate the sort of size of the opportunity or the number of use cases that we're seeing be most useful. That pre-writing stage, as you might expect, has a lot research, looking at the persona, looking at the prioritization of ideas, as Brody was speaking to. In terms of research, we're not seeing a ton there. And the reason because we're not seeing a ton there, I think, is a lot of that fallibility and a lot of that mistakes in terms of citing sources and some of those kinds of things. But we are seeing a ton of use cases in sort of that, what we would call typically the drafting stage, right? Where we're drafting raw content, drafting abstracts, drafting the other kinds of derivative content that we need to create, and so on and so forth through revisions, through activation, et cetera. What we're seeing basically is at every stage, there is some opportunity, but some more certainly than others. And then most importantly, and this is the key, and this is sort of the punchline to the whole thing, is over the last, call it 6 or 8 months, we've been categorizing, I've been collecting all of these use cases that we've seen out in the wild, and we've been categorizing them as sort of an exercise to say, right now, we're getting a lot of pressure from management, from ownership, from different, parts of the organization to create a certain kind of use case. And the sort of the buzzword is all about, right, efficiency, right? Can we lose headcount? Can we do things faster? Can we do things with fewer people, fewer resources, et cetera? So that's distinctly that lower right quadrant, right? We are more efficient in things that we're already doing. Those are the use cases there. But interestingly, only about a third, I mean, maybe you say it is a third, but it's only about a third of the use cases that are actually getting deployed are there. And that's a really fascinating thing. When you think about it, the things that we're already doing that AI can help us do faster, right? Only about a third of the use cases that we're actually seeing deployed are actually in that quadrant. Interestingly, only 6% are sort of the new capabilities that make us more efficient. In other words, is there new stuff that's going to make us more efficient? Stuff we're not doing today that's going to make us more efficient. Only 6%. Now, that also makes sense if you start to think about it, because we really don't know what we don't know, right? In other words, should we be using AI to scan all of our inboxes to, see where our processes really are with client relationships? Or should we be uploading every one of our blog posts to ask what content we haven't written about it? Yeah, it's neat, but we don't really know what we don't know there, so 6%. Then, if we look at sort of the things that we're not doing, in other words, net new things that would make us less efficient, in other words, that cool, new, awesome feature or that cool benefit that we can dream up, like rewriting all of our content so that there's a friendlier version available if people want to look at it, or create the same content, but only in much different voices across multiple channels, or convert a new blog to all the styles and tones and guidelines that we have for this new acquired company that we just acquired. Those are things that we wouldn't have done before, but that basically would be really cool. Only about 18%. The vast, like biggest percentage, and this is fascinating to me, almost half of the valuable use cases that we're seeing are what we would call supplements. In other words, they are adding to our existing activities, but it's stuff that we either didn't prioritize before or don't do very often or don't do as often as we should because we just took too much time. That's maybe where the early sort of fruit of the value of generative AI is. Things like suggesting better metadata for niche posts. We could, of course, do that. We should be doing that, but we often don't because it's just takes too long and there's no resources to be able to do it. So just get it out into the wild, just publish it out. Or adding voice technology to our existing blog posts so that you can listen to the post versus just reading the post. That's something we probably should do or could do, but we don't because the cost and the resources needed would slow us down too much. So these are the earliest use cases. The point being, make sure that when you're doing that process work and you're assigning your use cases, that you're actually categorizing the right ones, the ones that you would basically be prioritized. In other words, it's super important that you align your goals and your objectives and your use cases with what business leadership perceives to be the real value here. We see this tension a lot where all the use cases for this new cool tool that we want to implement in our team is going to provide all these net new capabilities that we're going to need, basically a new headcount or new skills or new ideas or longer processes. Basically, it's going to not make us more efficient, but it is going to make us better as marketers. But then leadership is expecting us to do stuff that just makes us faster, better, and do stuff with fewer people. So once you deploy a collaborative sort of workflow process to basically look at those processes, now you can make sure that they're aligned. So when we look at this, 63%, remember, of those use cases are not about more efficiency. They are about doing net new things or things that we should be doing that we've deprioritized. Ultimately, a collaborative workflow solution, in other words, when you start thinking about that process across and really mapping out from those what really happens versus what should happen, it will not only help you figure out a better process, a more efficient process without technology, but it'll help you identify the priority areas where new technology, and especially that which is given in artificial intelligence, can actually create. This is why I think the whole meme of AI won't take away your jobs, so somebody using AI will. I think that's complete BS. I think basically we need to remember that jobs are activities, they're not people. We are the people who will decide that. AI will replace some of your jobs, the less efficient ones, the ones you don't want to do, the ones you haven't been doing because you felt like you needed to prioritize them. But if you use AI, you can decide, your team can decide which jobs they would replace. So thanks for that. I'm going to sort of turn it back over to Brody now. Maybe we can take a few questions in the time that we have remaining and see where we go from here.
Yeah. Please throw your questions in the Q&A panel. Robert, I'm going to go ahead and kick things off. I've got a few. We talked about it a little bit earlier, and I kind of brought it up. I would love your take on some of the AI tools that we would consider the general tools that everybody's using. They do a whole bunch of different things, something like a ChatGPT versus the very use case specific tools that are popping up all the time, very niche, do a very specific thing. I wonder from the standpoint of a company who already probably has a really large software budget, they're looking at all this stuff. they'd love to use some of these very specific tools, but maybe they already, are tinkering with Chat GPT, and, it can do a whole bunch of things. There's new capabilities being added all the time. How should a marketing team kind of navigate this kind of world with budget considerations, all the tools, both general, niche, kind of, how should they be thinking about it?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And I think when we start looking at, because they're everywhere now, right? I mean, AI is embedded into everything. It's embedded into Divvy. It's embedded into, Microsoft, 365. It's been embedded into Google Workspace. It's embedded into, Canva. It's embedded into just about every tool that we use for content creation. AI and generative AI specifically has become sort of part and parcel with what you get. So the question is, how do you really start to segment that into the right tool at the right time for the right person? And what we've seen is that there's sort of a decision to make about where you're applying AI in your process, right? So for example, if you're using something in the drafting stage, right, probably an individual tool in the early days would be fine, right? Because what you're looking at is embedded into something that you're using as an authoring tool. Again, whether that be Canva or Google Workspace or, Microsoft 365 with Copilot or whatever it is, you're on your own process, right? You're editing, you're working, you're writing. And so it is really, segmented to your desk. And so that individual tool is probably okay. When you start asking the question, well, how does my team leverage that knowledge or that learning? Well, now we have to start thinking about how does that knowledge sort of span the workflow? And what that really means is how does that institutional knowledge, the knowledge of learning from what I'm doing and what my neighbor is doing and what my other colleague is doing and what my boss is doing, how does that start to build up value over time? And if that's the case, well, we start thinking, well, we probably at some point need some kind of enterprise solution that has a custom learning model that will actually start to build that institutional knowledge, that will actually help us create a learning model that knows our jargon, that knows our words, that can help us with brand guidelines, that can help us with the right, the right ways to say things and and all those kinds of things. And those are where the enterprise tools really are coming to play when it comes to the content creation processes. How do we use that as think of it like a stepping stool, right? Or a platform to stand on, where all those things like translation, localization, the idea of understanding our words, our jargon, our terms, our brand guidelines, our tone from a company perspective gets better over time the more we, meaning the plural, literally the team, uses it. And that is the critical aspect of saying, where should it stop being an individual tool and where should it be an enterprise tool? The only way you're going to get that answer is if you actually map out your processes and sort of figure out where the biggest gaps are. And that'll tell you, do we need to actually look at that, those focal needs that I spoke to? Does that mean we should be looking only at enterprise tools, or should we start with just using the embedded tools that are already within Copilot and those sorts of things, and help us get better at it? And then maybe phase 2, we look at some of those enterprise tools. It's all basically on understanding where your process is and where the gaps are.
Yep. Long story short, it depends. Yeah.
Yeah. It's long story short is it depends.
Another one, I know that for many organizations, especially, maybe organizations on the smaller side that have, limited marketing budgets, limited resources, but especially like a software company that has a potentially a global audience, the desire to go and do more marketing in other markets, foreign markets, the whole translation process, providing marketing resources, whether it's websites, collateral, those kinds of things in other languages, is a big lift for a team with limited resources. But certainly the idea of AI helping in that regard, I wonder if in any of your research, any of the companies you've talked with, if they've been able to leverage AI tools to help with that, to supplement what they're already doing, those kinds of things. But also maybe some of the potential challenges or things you really need to be careful of, when you go that route?
Yeah, I think I mean I would tell you that translation, maybe not localization, but certainly translation is probably one of the biggest opportunities that we see sort of in the early days. I mean, it is one thing that Gen AI tends to get pretty right. And I know there are some, there's some sort of differing opinions on just how right it is, and that's why I would use the word translation and not necessarily localization, which is, it can get, and it comes back to this idea of, your specialty terms, your jargon, et cetera, in terms of translation and localization. But having said all that, the idea of real-time translation in sort of as a value to being able to help smaller organizations, especially, create their content in multiple languages, one of the coolest and most interesting use cases that we've seen, that is relatively easy to deploy and just truly valuable from the get-go, right? So there's really a lot of value there. The fallbacks are, of course, what it doesn't typically do well at this point is truly localization, right? Where you look at it and it's going to translate it word for word, but that joke that you make in English, US English, may not fly as well in German or in French or in Spanish, because it's just not, it's too topical, right? It's too cultural. And so some of those plays of words and play on words that we typically do in marketing copy typically have to be localized. So you have to watch out for that in terms of what it is you're translating, but that's one of the key early opportunities.
Yep. Understood. Yeah, I'm thinking also along the lines of localization, being able to, if you've got a photo that you've created that is obviously a US based, a photo, and but be able to throw it into an image, an AI image generator, and spit out the I don't know, the African version of it or the German version of it, and
That's right.
automatically takes the same the same idea of the photo, but localizes it based on clothing and backdrop and all of those kinds of things.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
I'm sure it's probably out there. So all right, I'll keep the floor open just for another minute or two. If anyone has any final questions, I know we've kept you here for 53 minutes, so I'll give everybody another quick second. Otherwise, any questions that do come through after the fact, we'll obviously try to answer those. But why don't we go ahead and wrap this up? Robert, thank you so much for your time today. And do definitely remember that webinar offer that you see up on the screen. Check us out, lithoforlife.com. It has more information about the offer itself. And we'll go ahead and just wrap. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. Really appreciate your time today. Thank you, Robert. And we'll see you guys next time.
Absolutely.
Bye, y'all.